Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching. No name, no address, no ID. William was the name of a local homeless man who knew him. Only there weren't many of those people. A couple of people from next door who always brought the elderly man something to eat. Yes, the cashier at the local store didn't want to let him in at first, but the homeless man stubbornly came. "Look, I have money." The good man threw it in his hat. "I'll buy some food and leave. I don't want anything else. I'm not a thief. I'm not a thief. I've never stolen once in my life," the old man said, and they let him in. At first, the store guards watched him closely, but they soon got used to him. They helped him out with expired merchandise that was going to be written off. That's how William survived. Every day he walked down the same street at the same time. It was a street leading to the local church aisle. The homeless were served there. William would go out early. By then the service was over, and there were hardly any people left inside. He always saw the disdain in the eyes of those around him and hadn't expected to be treated any differently for a long time. William visited the aisle to pray. He had something to ask the Almighty, only he did not ask for himself. And he always put a candle in a square candlestick for the rest of his soul. "God, if you exist. And if you can hear me, make them feel good there. They didn't deserve what happened to them. They weren't guilty of anything, and you took them away. But if you took them away, you keep a good eye on them. We're responsible for the ones we tame. And you're responsible for the ones you took before your time," whispered through his gray beard. The old man was dropping tears. In the church aisle, he was treated kindly. They asked about his health, gave him something to eat and drink. Sometimes things were brought to the church for those in need. And William did not freeze to death in the winter. Only thanks to these clothes, he got a warm blanket. I went back to the tiny basement where I could always shelter from the rain and wind. In winter, the temperature there was still above zero, but it was still above zero. But it was still very cold. But the human body adapts to everything, and William got used to such a life. And how did he get there? No one ever asked. So a bum was a bum, his own fault? That's what most people thought. Nobody cared. Everyone was busy living their own lives. A headache is sometimes more important to a person than wars and the calamities of the world. And a gray-haired homeless man with an ugly scar on his cheek is hardly worthy of the attention of others. There are many of them. He looked 60 years old with long gray hair and piercing eyes. One could only guess how much this man had gone through, how many tears he had drank. His face, like an archive, held many typewriters. Some were formed with sadness. Others were frozen on his face with horror and fear. Others were drawn from a smile. Once upon a time he had still been able to smile, but now he rarely did, only when Richard came to see him. He was a short boy with black hair. Every now and then he ran into the bum. Their friendship had lasted almost a year. The boy had run away from the local orphanage when he was abused there. When injustice was done there, which was very often the case in such institutions, power would decide everything. Whoever was stronger got the upper hand. The highest power possessed the caretakers in such institutions. They were the ones at the head of the chain. They could take pity and they could punish. And they punished wholesale and retail without distinction all at once. Say for fighting, like the last time Richard had been at Williams and spent a few days on the old couch. Richard had stood up for a little boy who had had a toy taken away from him by his elders. Took a beating for it. Fought like it was his last fight to the death. But of course he lost the fight. There were 4 elders, and Richard was the only one who dared steal their toy, without which the child cried all the time. Sometimes orphans, having no parents, became attached to objects. He sneaked out of the building and ran away. So today, the boy, flapping his nose, walked toward the place where he'd always met William. "Hello, William," said the boy. On his shaggy head, his hair was bunched up into a cocoon. His jacket was wide open. "Did he run away again?" asked William. He smiled at the young fighter for justice and remarked to himself that he still hadn't forgotten how to do it. Smiling was unaccustomed to him. But if his heart demanded it, who would argue with him? "I ran away. I didn't stay long. Stole some strawberry gum for the little ones. No one noticed. But I still want to sit back." Richard showed the package that contained the children's chewing gum. William shook his head disapprovingly. "You're stealing again. Do you want to spend the rest of your life in jail? What am I telling you?" "Don't scold me. I only take a little. I have money. Look, if I'd been caught, I'd have paid. But I didn't get caught. See, now I can buy another pack, and then there'll be enough gum for sure, even enough for everybody." William scolded the boy. They talked. The tramp asked him how he was being fed, how he was doing with his caretakers, with the boys. They hurt each other, of course, like any children in any other company, whether it was an elite kindergarten or an ordinary yard. But on the whole, Richard rarely complained. "The teacher is probably looking for you, and you're doing it again. What are we going to tell her this time?" The old man squinted his eyes. "She's not looking. Her fiancé's here to see her. She has no time for us. I could sit here with you till tomorrow." The boy sat down next to William on a homemade wooden bench that used to be a fruit crate. He sat so close that William could feel his warmth and hear him breathing. Usually everyone tried to stay away from him, but Richard was always getting closer to him. Apparently he lacked human warmth. William's heart beat faster every time he did so, and he remembered how long ago he had had a child in his life. There had been a beautiful wife, and those memories lay at the very bottom of his memory and hardly came up anymore, only moments. But let's go to church. Mother was handing out delicious cakes today. The two of them walked down the street. Spring had arrived, but a cold wind was blowing. It was sweeping across the sky with angry gray clouds, as if it were sweeping up everything the winter had left behind. This year it left everything quickly, and left the wind and heavy snow and the clouds and frost at night. In some places, it was already noticeable that in a couple of days, it would be April. There, where the sun is well warmed up, we even wanted to take off our hats and experience that pleasant, familiar to us from childhood feeling, when after a long winter you first take off your hat and begin to perceive everything differently. It is as if the hat has been terribly hindering you all this time and separating you from the world around you. As we reached the aisle of the church, William and Richard smelled freshly baked bread. It was his mother baking goodies to treat the congregation in the morning. Some of them also shared treats during the holidays, and so it was today. "Come on in. Hurry up, you're freezing," shouted the mother to them. "I brought you a boy. Look, what a clever runaway. We are friends with him. We made a deal. Now he will try your culeche and go straight back to the shelter." The mother welcomed them with hot tea and treated them both to a special building, a small outhouse near the parish. It was not heated, but when the volunteers or the Matushka herself cooked, it got warm. There were benches around the edges. Each table could feed a couple dozen people at once. Homeless people from all over the neighborhood came here to eat. Everyone was welcome here. No one was asked why they came or why they were hungry. Everyone was welcomed with a smile. During the day, young girls and boys from the local college worked here. They were promised a reward for this in their studies, so they got involved. Everyone came here at first for their own benefit, but the second time they always came back of their own free will. People felt needed, important. Not like in a stuffy office, photocopying a stack of papers you don't understand to whom, or in a classroom listening to a lecturer who was clearly not interested in his subject. And all he cared about here was the money students and their parents could get in exchange for credit. This world was infinitely screwed up, and it's hard to believe there's any way to change it. And the church parish is that little bit of the real thing that remains, not eaten up by corruption, greed untouched by the greed of officials, not occupied by the rich. Some of the church industry may have fallen under the wheels of this toxic world, which at times seemed to be rolling into the underworld. But it was here that true kindness lived. Here was true mercy and peace. Here William felt less miserable. Was he a deeply religious man? There was hardly anything about this parish that cured for anything and blew his soul to shreds. On several occasions, the vagabond William had been to confession with the local father. Before that, he learned to clean himself up, bathe himself and wash his clothes. Perhaps the only thing that distinguished William from a real hobo was a craving for cleanliness. He regularly went swimming at the local public bathhouse. There was a section in need of repair where no visitors were allowed. The floors were picked out. The faucet was dangling, leaking damp everywhere. But William didn't demand a marble floor, that he was allowed to bathe there. William found out a year ago when he talked to a tipsy David. He'd been kicked out of the house by his wife for cheating. And he slept all night next to the basement where William slept. David was talking loudly, cursing on the phone. William woke up and went out to him. Word of mouth, and David offered to take the money and bathe whenever he wanted. But only after closing time, and only on his shifts. So William was well aware of his schedule and took advantage of the benefit the homeless offered him. Soon Richard asked to use the restroom. His mother took him in and told him to wash his face and neck. The boy obediently carried out the task, and he and William went to their rooms. Heartily, they thanked the parishioners for the hot tea and food. On the way back, they recalled going to the river together last summer, arranging a mushroom picking outing. Richard had only 9 at the orphanage that weekend, but he had seen the eldest run off through a torn, and the fence to do her own thing. One of the older boys across the street in a high-rise had a girlfriend who loved him, and he ran to her through the window almost every night. By winter, though, they taped it shut, and the guy just started running away at will. A couple of times he was caught, scolded, and then allowed to meet with this very girl on the grounds of the shelter. Better that than having to look for him all over town. It was from guys like that that Richard had learned to run away unnoticed and to come back quietly. The boy said goodbye to William. As always, he hugged him tightly and ran. It was getting dark outside. William went back to his cold den. The pain in his leg always got worse in the evening, and he could hardly make it to the couch. Actually, his furniture was not limited to the couch. There was plenty of useful material in the dumpster, which the hobo dragged to his humble corner. A small round table, a pair of antique chairs with different walls. There was an old rug which the hobo had cleaned out as best he could. Stray cats often went there to warm themselves. William was glad of every animal. A stray dog named Dora lived with him on a permanent basis. He had traded her from the local drunks for a pack of cigarettes. These subhumans were already taking the dog to the drowning. They said he didn't need it. What good was the dog? The dog was big, a mixture of mongrel and sheepdog, judging by her coloring understanding. Affectionate, she'd lived with William for 3 years. She ran off periodically but came back every time. Apparently something was wrong with her. Only once she brought 4 puppies. William had a lot on his mind then. There was nothing to feed them. He found a beautiful box, went out with them to the street, where he sometimes asked for alms and waited. That same day, a girl from the dog kennel picked them up. She came by later and showed me pictures. All the puppies grew up in the kennel. They were spayed and given away, but Dora never brought any more puppies. That night, William couldn't sleep for a long time. He remembered how he had met Richard last spring. William had gone to the store to get bread and the cheapest canned goods. Richard had just been caught by a security guard. Richard was crying, and the angry guard snatched a packet of butterscotch out of the little child's hand. William's heart ached, so small, hungry, and not even for himself. The homeless man could barely walk then, but he ran like a young man to the scene. He shouted to the guard, who was about to turn the thief into the police or the guardianship authorities. "What do you want, William, huh?" The guard already knew his face. "Why are you so heartless? How much did he take?" "He's from the orphanage. He stole for the little ones. Look at him, hungry. His feet are wet. He probably ran to buy sweets, but he didn't have enough money. He's so little." "Is that any way to treat him? Punish him." And the guard hesitated. "Why steal? You should have told the cashier you were a little short. Maybe she would have forgiven me." "Yeah, she threw me out of here last time for a ruble." Richard interjected his nose into the conversation. A very young, resentful of the world, who knew no affection or kindness. He stood in the store where he was discussed, but not judged. That's the way it is with us now. No matter what happened to a man, he stole and went to jail, even though he took very little. No one would be poorer if he did good, if he got into trouble. But people are unaccustomed to sympathy. Hearts felt as if they were stale in the old days, which William remembered very well. The boy would have been scolded, of course, but he would probably have been fed and given toffee, and the cashier would have forgiven the 10 cents he was short of. William held out his only bill to the cashier, who slipped him 2 packs of toffees. The homeless man walked out of the store with the boy. "Did you hear that? Did you ask the kid?" "No, nobody's looking for me now until morning." Our kindergarten teacher locked herself in her room with her fiancé. William then took Richard to himself and told him how bad it was to steal. "You better come to me if you need anything. As you can see, I'm a rich man. Maybe I can help you with something. We'll think of something together, but don't you dare steal. You know how many smart, good boys like you have been sent to prison as juveniles. Just because somebody stole something, somebody broke the law. You can't do that. You gotta hang in there. You gotta hang in there. You gotta become a man and make it in the world. You know, it's a hard road, but there's no other way to get to the top. You have to climb." Richard looked at the old man and waved his hand. "Kids who have a mom and dad don't climb those very peaks. Helicopters deliver. They don't lift a finger. How they are taught everything, fed drunk. And they don't care about anybody but themselves. I got 8 hungry babies in the orphanage. They're hungry and haven't seen anything in their lives. And there are other smaller ones. And there are other smaller ones. And they can't have butterscotch." Very maturely, Richard said. With a sigh, William realized. The boy had grown up early. Sitting next to him on the couch was a grown man in the body of an 8-year-old boy. And his character wasn't bad. You could tell that in a man right away. Not everyone would do a crime for others. For himself, okay, but not for others. And that's very rare. William walked Richard to the gate the first time he saw him. They were already looking for him there. The caretakers had noticed that the boy had run away. "Don't scold him." Richard ran to the store to buy taffy for the little ones. "And where did he get the money?" asked the kindergarten teacher. And I gave him the money. It's my lucky day, you know. Business is booming. I deposited $1 million in my bank account, and I shared it with the boy, joked the bum, winking at Richard. He chuckled. "Don't scold him. He's a very good guy. He does things for others. You'll see, you'll need him. He'll have your back, too, in your hour of need." The tutor thought about the homeless man's words, nodded and exhaled, looking at the orphan. "All right, come on in. The bullies must have been waiting for you. Thank you for seeing him off. But next time there will be a punishment, and a serious one," the teacher said sternly, and Richard swore to her then that he would not run away again. And later he had to repeat that vow. 5 more times, no less. That's how many times he was caught when he escaped, but he escaped much more often. Richard visited William regularly, once every 2 weeks. William was always waiting for him, buying him goodies. Sometimes he would find toys for him, some clothes. There was a lot of stuff in the trash, including the good stuff. There was no place to wash him, but the shelter had a laundry room. Richard rejoiced in every little thing, as if he were 3 years old. With the intelligence of an adult, he was still a defenseless little child at heart. He had no childhood, you might say. So he took every chance he could to make up for it, to please his inner child. In the summer, William took Richard fishing. He made his own fishing rod. He got the hook from a local fisherman and found some fishing line. Richard watched William digging in the garden with a broken piece of shovel. It's just fish, and everything is delicious. Where did you learn that? The kid asked. Eating carp. In the army where I served, there were a lot of rivers, and we managed to go fishing. A petty officer used to take us there himself, spread out along the shore. We were very friendly, William said, omitting some of the things Richard didn't need to know. These memories gradually put William to sleep. He slept like a baby and saw Richard in his dreams. And then Richard was gone. It was the end of summer. William was waiting for him to give him a toy figurine of some superhero he had found in the park. Apparently one of the children had forgotten it. But Richard was gone. 3 weeks went by and he didn't show up. What had happened to him? Was he sick? Maybe he was adopted. Why didn't he break the good news? Didn't come running to say goodbye? William shared his worries with David when he came for another bath after closing time. William came out of the bath with wet hair. He smelled of shampoo that someone had forgotten. He washed his hair and washed his clothes, cleaned his shoes. The army habit of keeping everything clean couldn't just go away. He put everything on and went out. It was hot outside. It wouldn't be hard to dry off. I'm worried about something. So they probably adopted him. You're not his grandmother to tell you everything. He's probably forgotten his own name by now. Do you want him to remember you? David said. William wondered, really, why did he think Richard was so attached to him? A young boy, even though he had no parents. Why would he need some bum? Yes, they were in touch, but that doesn't make them related. With a heavy heart, the old man went home. He didn't sleep well at night. He was anxious, even though I'm nobody to him. But I'm worried if he's adopted, I'll only be glad. I'll be happy for him. But suddenly he's in trouble. Suddenly he's transferred. Or maybe he's sick. I'll just find out for myself. In the morning, William went to the shelter. He was too wrinkled and tattered, but too clean and modest for a bum. He arrived, knocked on the window. There flashed a barely visible shadow. Soon a caretaker came out of the north doorway. A young woman with a short haircut. Stocky. She always wore a knee-length skirt and a blouse. Is that what you meant to ask about Richard? He came and disappeared. Is he all right? William asked. The teacher pressed her lips together and lowered her eyes when she raised them again. There was a look of dismay in them. William realized 2 things in that second. First, something had really happened to Richard. And 2, he cared about the boy. No, he's not all right. She closed the door behind her. She came a little closer. William prepared to hear the worst. He was worried about him as if he were his own son. And the images of days long ago when he had to hear terrible things about his loved ones flashed back to those feelings of hopelessness and fear that he had experienced a long time ago. The scars on his heart occupied him with renewed vigor. Richard collapsed. He didn't regain consciousness for a long time. Now he has amnesia and his spine is injured. He's not thinking straight. He can't move. He's in pain, and there's no one to look after him. He's all alone in there, you know? The doctors told me straight out that Richard won't last long in that hospital. He'll die if they don't move him to the capital. At the last words, the woman's voice trembled, her lower lip trembled, and tears flowed from her eyes. But she quickly pulled herself together. "I'll try to help," William said. "How can you help him? You know, pray for him." The nurse closed the door behind her, and William sighed with a certain amount of relief. Richard is alive. There was hope for him. All he needs is a good hospital, and he needs money for treatment. That's all. His loved ones didn't have that chance then. He would have turned the world upside down if they had had that chance. But they just showed him 2 black bags with bodies in them. And here there is hope, and happiness can happen. Prayer. But of course God doesn't have a bank account here. He only has us, and we have to help ourselves. And we have to help ourselves and our loved ones, said himself. William went home. Everyone here is his own God, and there's nothing to look up to the sky. You have to do everything yourself. William didn't hesitate. He went straight to his den. "Darling, coaxing my leg not to hurt so much. You and I have a lot of walking to do today, but now stop it." He spoke, and my leg, as if hearing him, began to hurt less. William went down to his basement. On the carpet, Dora was asleep. Through a small, cloudy window at the top of the south wall, a ray of light was falling on her. It was cool in the cellar, and Dora was dozing with pleasure. The street dog was used to not paying attention to noise. William was always amazed at this quality of hers. You could shoot guns next to it, it wouldn't wake up. He walked past the dog, lifted up the seat of the couch, and pulled out his ceremonial tunic, nice and untouched. William changed his clothes, then took out the rags stored there in the sofa and hung them with trembling hands over his hair, taking a mirror in a neat ponytail at the back so he wouldn't have to look. The grey beard only added to the image of feeling like the man you'd been forever ago again. It was so strange to him, as if all his old feelings had returned. He was proud to have served in Afghanistan again, that he had become a veteran, had received many awards. He fearlessly saved people's lives, knowing no one was waiting for him anywhere. William was also from an orphanage, so he understood Richard well when he graduated from there, went to serve, signed his contract. And then it was on. Hotspots, fear, pain, death. It wasn't much different than what he'd been through in the asylum. Almost everyone who served with him was afraid of death. Sad for their relatives, dreamed of a quiet life. And William, he didn't know that life loved affection and care. He did not want to go back, so he covered his comrades and was not afraid to go ahead. He had a chance to kill, seen the spark of life go out of a close friend's eyes, seen an enemy cut off the head of someone with whom he had just shared a porridge in the morning. He could not forgive such a thing, took out their whole platoon with his partner, and then dragged him for several kilometers to the hospital, out of thirst for other people's blood, shocked. And in that fight he will never forget. Shouldn't forget him. John, the same partner he carried to the hospital, who was the chairman of the Afghanistan Veterans Council today. He walked into the building with his head held high. Never mind that yesterday he was begging at the train station. It's all tinsel. It's all a game. What he was has never left him. The essence of man does not change with the years. It only acquires new habits and cares fat or wrinkles, scars, and traumas, and time to lick the wounds, leaving only images that are hard to believe. Was it really all with me? John is busy, said the secretary. But William went right past her into the office, where the name of his comrades was engraved on a gold plate. Sitting at the big cherry table was a gray-haired man in a shirt and tie, smoothly shaven. He too had a scar on his face, on his chin. William remembered well where he had earned it. "Hello, big boss," he smiled. John hung up without finishing the conversation. He got up. "I can't believe my eyes. Then he kicked the secretary out and told her to cancel all the meetings. And don't let anyone in to see him. The comrades embraced, weeping. I thought you were dead. Everybody thought so. They even put out an ad on you. Where were you? John asked, not hiding his feelings. Do you know, I live on the street. The smile fell off John's face. I know what you've been through. I do. You of all of us are the least deserving of it. You know it's terrible. What happened to your wife and what happened to your son? The heart-to-heart talk went on for several hours. First they drank whiskey, then tea, not to learn about each other, not to remember each other. Not to remember each other was just impossible. It would have been indecent, considering that they were not just friends. They were literally dying for each other as brother for brother. William remembered well how the two of them had buried the dog that had died in Afghanistan. I pitied him to the point of tears. She was a good, kind dog. The whole platoon loved and fed her. She was the one who raised a fuss. When at 2-0 they were spotted by the enemy. She was the first one to get shot. After the fight, she and 2 other guys were gone. John then made her a big, nice cross, and it was engraved. We are responsible for those we have tamed. He loved the dog more than anyone else, took care of him, treated his wounded paw without fear of getting blood-stained, without fear of being bitten. When asked why he did this, John always answered, because we are responsible for those we have tamed. That was his philosophy, to which he was faithful to the end. I didn't come here for nothing, John. I came to ask for help, William said. There's a boy. He's from the orphanage in the Zavotsky district. He broke his back, he got a head injury, and he's dying. He's a good boy, just like me, as you once understood. He needs to go to the capital, and he needs help. Our hospital doesn't care for him, and we don't have doctors like him here. And he's got a long way to go. Help me. There were tears in William's eyes. Sure, no problem. I'll do everything in my power. You can count on it. We will. You did good to come. I've been looking for you, man. I'm not going to leave you in that basement. Don't even think about it. Hearing his name was so unfamiliar, he remembered again who he was. William the war hero, don't worry about me. I chose my own life. Save the kid. He's running out of time. On the same day, Richard was transported by helicopter to a good hospital. However, the situation was worse than imagined. Richard needed head surgery, several spinal surgeries, and a long course of rehabilitation. He didn't take his cell phone from him either. The big boss had to go down to that basement by himself to see an old friend, to whom he unequivocally owed his life at least twice. John used to go there to tell me the news about Richard. Yes, and to have a heart. To heart talk. Richard has been on treatment for a week now. Doctors say the boy's had comorbidities. This complicates the situation. He's not life-threatening right now. He is being treated but needs surgery. He needs money, and a lot of it. I don't have that much. You know, money doesn't mean much to me. I invested everything in his treatment. I could take out another loan, but that wouldn't solve the problem. That won't be enough, John said, afraid of sounding stingy. Don't worry. That's it. You don't have to take out a loan. You have a family. You have to think about them too. My family has everything. It was my savings. I owe you a lot more, you know, and I'll help in any way I can. I've already paid for the TV ads. We'll try to raise the amount of money we need from around the world. William sighed. There is hope. And that means you can't give up. You can't do it even in your mind. You think bad thoughts, you give up. You have to think good thoughts. You have to think good thoughts. You have to wait and hope. Then God within you will lead you down the path that you mentally trampled. That's why they say that thoughts are material. Whoever thinks about a lot of things will end up doing them. Discipline. It has to start in the head. That's what William was taught by a general during the war in Afghanistan. As soon as you imagine your death on the battlefield, you're already dead. The TV commercials just blew up the population. The story about an orphanage boy who needed surgery got people to donate money for his treatment. John had already contacted all of his fellow soldiers who were still alive and asked them to help too. The amount was eventually raised in less than a week. The newspapers had the headlines, "Orphan boy wanted to snatch apple for orphanage kids, but he fell and was paralyzed." People called on their own and asked what they could do to help. The treatment lasted 6 months. All that time, William got news from John. Several times he called Richard. His memory came back to him. His speech was restored. He was the same, only he didn't walk. He was also always happy to get calls from William. "You never said you fought. Tell me, how was it?" the boy asked, lying in the hospital bed. "I'll tell you. War is always fear. 1, pain. 2, sweat. 3, blood. 4, tears. 5, war is very bad. That's why the whole world tries to make sure no one else knows these horrors. You better tell me how you're holding up in there." "Aren't you afraid of surgery?" William asked. "No. The doctors tell me it's no big deal, that I'll just sleep and they'll fix me up and that's it. You know how good the food is here. I've never seen food like this before, and I got friends here too. Don't get bored there. I'll come see you soon," Richard promised. When the last operation was over, Richard was still unable to walk. He spent a long time on special machines. The doctor said that everything was done wonderfully, and the boy was quickly on the mend. He spent another 6 months in rehabilitation, but it was time to return to the orphanage. Now he was able to walk on his own, little by little by little, but he could. And William was waiting for Richard to come. He was counting the days when he could see the boy. If he could, he would adopt him. But the homeless man would not be allowed to do that. That afternoon, a car stopped noisily outside the hobo's den. John came down with a bag of food, as usual. The friend refused to accept help from him. He did not want him to help him with his job and housing. But he always took food without question, so John helped him in any way he could. He also took him to a private clinic where he had been treated himself. And he made him get a complete checkup. He was prescribed medication, which he promised to take. His leg began to hurt less after the treatment. The doctors showed William how it should be rubbed, how massages should be torn to reduce the pain. "Hello, how are you here?" John asked, placing the bags on the small round table in the corner of the basement. "It's all right. Come in. Make yourself at home." John laughed. "You know that your house was renovated a long time ago, right? Your room is empty, but it's still yours." "I can't go back there. You know I can't. They died there. Everything will be reminiscent there. So sell it, buy a new one, another one. I'll help you," John insisted. He was so unhappy that his comrade in arms was living in the basement that he was ready to drag him out by force. And you know what happened? My wife and I have known each other since the orphanage. She was a quiet, kind little girl. She cried for her mother all the time. I don't remember from my parents. She was 10 years old when she was brought to the orphanage. We didn't communicate much, but I used to go there a lot. I used to visit the guys when they were on leave. I served here, signed my contract, left. And you know what happened? You and I went through Afghanistan together. When I came back, I wanted to go back into combat, and I didn't know how to live like everybody else. Civilian wasn't for me all the time. But they didn't take me. You know, that leg wound. That's when I met Suzanne. She came to see our educator and the kids, too. She graduated, became a seamstress. We got to talking and became friends. It just sort of happened. We started dating, got married. We had a son. I used to wake up at night screaming. I, like all of us, had a war injury. But my family was waiting for those terrible memories. 4 years later, I had nightmares quite rarely. You don't know, of course, but she was expecting her second child. Her son was due to have a baby sister. When did all this happen? I just went to work that night on the night shift. Susanna was throwing up. She was having a hard time with the pregnancy. I was working for two to feed my family, and I didn't know anything. Nobody called me, and who would call? Suzanne and I were orphans. We didn't have any family or friends. I went to the ashes, and in the morning they told me there had been an explosion. The carbon monoxide had filled all the rooms. It turned out later that everyone on that floor had died long before the explosion. They fell asleep, and that was it. It was a simple communal apartment, and there were no doors. It was a hot summer. Nobody closed them at night to keep the air out. The kitchen was in communal rooms, and an alky neighbor was cooking. There you go. The explosion didn't do much damage to the building. There was an open window. There was no fire. It was repaired and rebuilt. I was still there at the time. They helped me put our room back in order. But as soon as I went back there, it was like knives cutting me from the inside. One day I left and didn't come back. I couldn't even go to get my things. I haven't been there for 15 years, and I won't go. It's not my home anymore. It's a cemetery. John patted his friend on the shoulder. You know, let me take care of it. Buy you a room, and I'll sell this one. Trade it. I've got contacts in real estate. Come on. William shook his head in the negative. John, that's not why you came to me, is it? Something to say about Richard? Yes. About him, John scratched his head. You're right. I got a call today. Richard has been trying to be adopted by a family for a long time. They don't have any children. They saw him on TV and want to take him to the foster care agencies, prepare the paperwork. That's how William smiled. That's news. That's great, that's great. He's going to have parents. You know, it wasn't all for nothing. The old friends talked for a long time in the shabby, damp basement. When John left, William sighed heavily. But now Richard would be all right. One thing gnawed at his heart. He would never see the boy again, but it was for the best, for sure. 2 years passed. William did not give in to John's entreaties, and he stubbornly drove him food. They saw each other a couple of times a week and talked like old friends. The October before last, he lured him out of the basement on the sly, kept him overnight. When William returned the next day, he didn't recognize his alley. The locals were shocked, if only because the homeless man began to get frequent rides from a rich man in a suit in a foreign car. What on earth is going on here? Mother of God, William exclaimed. John smiled as he looked at the renovations he'd made for a friend. Invested in. Well done, guys. Don't swear, but I won't let you freeze. They fixed the entrance to the basement. So now there was a full-fledged door, electricity, a heater, and light. The walls were lined, insulated. The floors were lined, insulated. The floors were level. Boards were laid. New carpet was put on top. Dora was already sleeping on it. John knew how dear the dog was to his friend and asked the workers not to kick her out. There was also a small toilet in the corner of the room. I couldn't get any water in. You know, it's not a working building up here, but there's a bathhouse across the street. You can go there for free. I've already made arrangements. David knows you, as it turns out. And William began to live a little better in the warmth of the light. Now he could read even in the evenings, and his pension was enough to buy food, water, and books. This was where William was going to spend his old age. What else did he need? He already had everything in his life. Everything had already happened. There was family, there was war, there was loss. There was the boy he'd saved at heart. John made a friend go with him to his son and wife's grave, and he had only been there a few times. It was hard to go there. He wasn't there for the funeral. He wasn't there for the funeral. His heart got bad. and he was being pumped out by doctors. Then he was in the hospital for a long time, couldn't come to his senses. So another big step was to visit the grave of the only family members he had. He was now a regular visitor to the cemetery, though he did not believe that his wife and son were standing there waiting for him. William was not religious. He conceded that there was rebirth. Sometimes he thought that his son's soul might somehow have been born again in little Richard's body. Perhaps God thought he had taken too much from him and decided to give his son back to him, even in this way. Such thoughts distracted William from his drab life. He desperately wanted to believe that there was some meaning behind all these troubles. Maybe heaven and hell were right here, not down or up, but here on earth. For those who had behaved well in a past life, the new birth would be heaven. For those who had done little good, hell. He wondered all the time why he was destined for such trials. After all, few had endured as much in life as William had. The orphanage, the army, the war, the loss of his wife and son. And then he went through so much more for the unit. He was so afraid that fate was preparing that fate for the boy too. He and Richard had so much in common. He saw himself in him, and no one helped him himself. Not once in his life had he been fondled, hugged, pitied. And William didn't want that to happen to Richard and managed to help him. Fortunately, John, his old comrade, in arms, was a man of honor and gave literally everything to fulfill his friend's request. A long time ago, Richard got caught shoplifting security guard, a thief and a risk he stole not for himself, for the little ones. So William came to ask not for himself, for the little guy, and things worked out even better than one could have imagined. Not a day went by that William did not think of the boy. But there was no way to contact him. He didn't ask John for Richard's new address. His new father and mother would hardly be happy when a bum from the provinces asked for their son on the phone. But it warmed my heart that the boy was now in good hands. Of the memorable things that had happened to William this year, there was another. Dora became ill and stopped eating, drinking, and almost didn't rise. William didn't go to the hospital himself, but for the dog's sake, he pulled out all of his retirement savings and went to the vet clinic. She underwent surgery. I had to give all my money to save the dog. For the next month, William started going to church every day again. Mother was surprised. In the last few months, William began to come only to the service. He put out candles, but he hadn't looked into the soup kitchen for the homeless in a long time. He ate once a day at the soup kitchen again and made sure to bring a piece for Dora. They made it. Wouldn't be the first time. It had been worse. The dog recovered. That day was no different from the others. In the afternoon, William was reading a book thrown in the trash. When a car suddenly stopped in front of his carriage, the door slammed and someone timidly knocked on the door. The old man opened, expecting to see John on the doorstep. But this time he was wrong. Before him stood a grown-up Richard. The boy was neatly trimmed. He wore nice clothes. Behind him stood a gray-haired man in an expensive tracksuit. "William, my darling, I was afraid I wouldn't find you." Richard hugged him so tightly that it took the old man's breath away. They hugged and cried and talked about how much they missed each other. There were probably only a few such moments of happiness in William's life, and this was the brightest in recent years. William cordially invited his guests to his house. Richard's foster father was surprised to see how homeless people lived in a provincial town. It was my comrade in arms, John. He helped Richard raise the money for his treatment. And you see, he didn't leave me in the den. Dad, look how William's place has become. Before there was just a couch and a table over there. Now there's even heaters. Dora's still here. The dog recognized the boy and came to lick his hands. Richard hugged her without fear of getting his new clothes dirty. "We didn't come here for nothing. Do you understand?" The boy's father asked, looking at the old man with warmth and love. "We've come for you. You "You are coming with us," Richard exclaimed happily. William's face changed, not knowing what to answer. "You know, all this year, Richard, all he talked about was you. He was afraid he wouldn't find you, and I couldn't take you right away. We were living in a rented apartment in town. Now we've rebuilt it. We live in a fancy house, but I'm away a lot, and my wife is young. She's afraid to be home alone, so she asked us to bring you too. Richard can't do without you." The man finished his words and fell silent. William frowned. "No way. I'm not leaving here. You'd better come and visit me. I got a cell phone now. We'll call each other." "You what, William? Let's go. Do you know how good it will be? Come on, we'll pick you up right away." Richard was fussing. "No, I'm not going. Thanks for the offer, but I'm fine here. I'm used to it, you know. I can't travel from here. My only friend lives here. My wife and son are buried here. I'll live here, and you come and visit me whenever you can." William said this with such an intonation that it became clear to everyone that he could not be persuaded, even to the point of being wanted, and went to lie down in the corner of the basement. Richard lowered his head. He sat down on the couch, experiencing despair and resentment. William didn't even realize how important he was to the boy. He had become the only person close to him in the whole wide world. They were really alike in many ways. And how much does an orphan need to become attached to a man? A few kind words. One kind deed. "I won't go without you. I don't want to. I've waited 2 years to see you. I even ran away once and almost got on the train. I need you, William, and I can't do without you." Tears welled up in Richard's eyes. At that moment, John came into the basement. Even though he had helped his friend get his pension, he still continued to go to his place with his food. They played checkers and talked about life. When William introduced everyone to each other and explained the purpose of his guests, John joined them, coaxing him to move in. "Do you want to stay here? You know, being used to is not always a good thing. Sometimes we get used to living in some swamp in the mud, and we're just scared to get out of it, to take a step aside. What if it gets worse?" But that's not the case. "You're not going to be living that far away. It's only 250 kilometers down the highway, and I'll be visiting. Besides, we have a dacha there 100 kilometers away. My wife and I will be there all summer. No one's waiting for you here. Look at the kid. We're responsible for what we've tamed. You can't say no to him now." After these words, William realized that his friend was right. He realized he couldn't refuse. He just didn't have the right. Otherwise, what kind of man was he? "John is right, unequivocally right. Are you sure I won't be a burden to you?" I asked my father. "Right. That's what we've wanted for a long time. I grew up in an orphanage too, just like Richard. They're all long dead now. You are very welcome. And Richard loves you very much. You'll have your own home. It's right next door as an outhouse. It's 4 times the size of this basement with a shower and a toilet. There's woods and a river there, and they catch carp like that." The boy's father persuaded him. "Say yes, William, or Daddy and I will stay here with you too." "But I can't do that. How are all 3 of us going to live here?" William laughed. "Okay, but I'm going to have one very big favor to ask. I have to take the dog. I can't leave him here. I tamed him too." William gathered his belongings, wrapped his tunic carefully, his awards, some of his possessions. The rest, which he did not plan to take with him, was packed too and taken to the church parish. I said goodbye to my mother. On the way out of town, I asked the car to stop near the cemetery. I stood by the grave with the cross. No one knows what he said. William always said the same thing, coming to them. "I remember you. I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. I will come to you. As soon as I'm allowed, it's a sin to leave here without permission. You will wait for me. I miss you. He wasn't afraid of death. He wasn't afraid of death. He was rather looking forward to it, but it tends not to rush to those who ask for it themselves. A month passed. William was firmly ensconced in an outhouse near the house. It had a wonderful Euro renovation, all the comforts he quickly became accustomed to. He had everything. Well, just everything. They even gave him a registration there. One of the new joys for William was the opportunity to go to the local library. He enjoyed reading, but he spent more time fishing. He also helped clean the yard, dashing through weeds. Such work was easy and pleasant for him. It was like therapeutic exercise, so he didn't have to sit too long. He was old, after all. Richard went to the local school. William was not strong academically, but he helped the boy, for example, to learn poetry. Together they went fishing on weekends. There were always plenty of fish in the house. Richard's foster mother was a very nice, kind, and modest woman. She treated William as if he were her own. She insisted that he lived in the house with everyone else, but he said he would be more comfortable in the guest house. And it was not easy to change his mind. William was especially fond of his neighbor, a fat but very cheerful woman in her 50s, widow, mother of 3 children, grandmother of 7 grandchildren. She was always noisy and cheerful, but her children were only passing through. So William helped her in domestic matters. The makeup man had to be tucked in. The cash register had to be held up. She was a very kind woman. William often went to her for tea to talk about life. She was the one who liked a little fuss, but she was such a cleaner, and everything was always bubbling and shiny. She also made the world's most delicious borscht. That was the diagnosis of her dish Richard once made. After that, he spent all Saturday at the river to catch fish and thank his neighbor for a delicious lunch. "Why don't you make me some tea?" "The one with chamomile always tastes especially good," William said, looking at her through the low fence. "For you, William." "Let's go for tea," she answered, and, abandoning the bed, hurried to find her neighbor with the tea she gathered and prepared only with her own hands.